How are you?
Hi, Charlotte. I'm good.
Good.
Are we
Good.
the only two connected?
Yeah, well, actually, I realized that it might have been a little bit confusing. So, the event doesn't start until 5. So
Oh,
the meeting opens at 4:30 so that we can get the presenters online, and then I'm going to be helping out with the setup. So I got to get all of the security setups and everything done. So yeah.
I'll come back at 5. I was a little confused. But actually, I wasn't confused by the emails. I didn't look at the emails. I have it on my calendar,
Oh,
paper calendar on my kitchen wall.
yep,
It's
yep,
4:30. So,
yep. Yeah,
okay.
no worries. So yeah, yeah, there's supposed to be I think we have like 40 people registered, something like that. So it should be a pretty good crew.
Yeah, that looks good. Okay.
Okay, take care. Hi, Eleanor.
Hi, I'm here.
Hey, how are you?
All right. Yourself?
I'm doing all right.
You want me to share or I guess let me know when you want me to share the moderator PowerPoint.
Yeah, go ahead. Anytime. I'll stop this share. Yeah,
Okay.
it's funny because
It's
and
good to have something up.
yeah, and so what happened was I threw that up because when I got on, Alex was already on,
Oh,
right? Because the funny thing is that even though we say it's 5 o'clock when we send the Zoom the Zoom
yeah.
appointment for them says 4:30.
4:30, I know.
Because that's when it starts. So, and a couple other people did the same thing, right? Because they're probably just going off of what's on their calendar.
I was a little afraid of that, to be honest.
Yeah. We got to sort that out.
So are you seeing my slide with the notes or just the slide?
I am seeing your slide and then also the next slide. It's like your presenter view where, there we go. Now I'm just seeing your slide.
Okay.
Okay, Emily Grayson. All right. I'm going to admit her. Okay, and I'm going to make her co-host. Okay. Here we go.
I'm also going to turn on my video just because the lighting's gotten a little bit different in my room now that it's getting darker earlier. So I want to make sure that I'm not like super backward.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hopefully my lighting is okay too.
Yeah, it looks great.
Might put on a background.
Nice. My computer doesn't do backgrounds. So I gotta like set my own thing up if I want one. Hi, Ollie.
Hello. It's like Chelsey's in the waiting room. Oh, and now Chelsea's in.
Yep. Thank you for helping me monitor the waiting room. Here we go.
I like Chelsea's background today.
To make sure I'm facing the right monitor.
Sorry about that. Oh, nice.
Okay. Just going through my checklist and watching for the rest of you presenters to join.
There's Lindsey. I think we're just
Okay.
waiting on April.
All right, there we go. Post. Okay. Awesome. Oh, I could start my video. There we go. Okay. So we're just waiting on who?
April.
April. Okay. Okay, so the meeting's already recording, which is good. And so now, and I've done a lot of the background stuff. The only thing I need to do is I'm just going to need to do the secret sauce, just live stream to Facebook when the time comes.
That sounds like magic to me.
Cheryl, what I'll probably do is we can, oh, Lindsay's joining again.
Huh?
You
Huh.
tricked Lindsay.
Roll just
Yeah.
offered her the link, so I did. So it must have her under my registration now. I don't know how that works.
Yes, that's how it works. That's what I did the last time we did this. I was being helpful and I sent out my registration link, and then there were like 6 Cheryls.
So I don't know if there's a way.
Can she
to
find
send it
the
to her.
email in her box by searching for the subject that Cheryl helpfully sent out that email that had said, like, look for this email in your box?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
if we admit the second Lindsay Parker, we can just rename her when she comes in.
That works too.
Or
I
yeah,
just
or you
had
can
to
tell
add
her
my
how to rename.
WDFW to mine.
Okay, I'm admitting the second Lindsay Parker.
Okay.
Hopefully it's April and not somebody else.
I didn't email it to anyone else, so it should be.
Let's see.
Hi. April, I'm assuming that's you and not Lindsay, and we will get you unmuted.
Let's see. I have the ask to unmute.
I, for some reason, can't unmute her. But you are, I think, still labeled as Lindsay Parker. So if you hover over your name, do you know how to rename yourself? Okay. If you want to rename yourself, that will be helpful.
Aha, there we go.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay, super.
Link anywhere.
All right. You are all co-hosts, so you should all be able to share your screen.
I have all of the presentations, so if something goes weird, I can bring those up fairly quickly. One other thing that we didn't really talk about is this meeting, or I can't remember, maybe we did talk about it. I just realized I didn't close out of all my programs. My little things are gonna pop up. I'm gonna exit out of presentation mode for a second. But we have this until 6:30. And so if anyone needs to go at 6, that is totally fine. But if we have a lot of questions and people are willing to stick around a little bit longer, I was planning on sort of opening it up and keeping it going, but doing a hard cut at 6:30. But at 6 o'clock, I'll do a time check just to be conscientious of people's evenings.
That's fine. I'm able to stick around at least till 6:30. So if there's
Okay.
a ton of interest, happy to be available.
Thank you. I'm just trying to turn off all my like calendar reminders and other things that might make noises while I'm trying to talk.
What do you think, Eleanor? Should I let folks in like 5 minutes early or something like that, or just wait till
I
closer
was
to the
thinking
time?
it'd be fine to start letting folks in whenever. Do we have, I don't think we have anything else that we need to talk about. Does anybody here have any other last questions, concerns? Okay, I think we can start probably letting them in whenever. I'm just, if we want to wait until I can pull up the thing, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, no, I'll give it a few more minutes because we don't want to start until 5, and then it's a little awkward.
Right, and then you get
Yeah.
people turning on there, doing all kinds of weird things. We had one presentation where somebody we kept on muting them, but then they would unmute themselves. I think they like got things backwards, and they luckily had their computer right where it was supposed to be, but they went to the bathroom, which wasn't too far away. We could hear some noises that no one should have been able to hear. So I'm in favor of waiting till a little bit later.
Well, just before this started, I opened it up. I got the meeting started so I could start doing the checklist of the different security things and everything. And my daughter's cleaning the windows, right? And which is great. They need to be cleaned, and she's working on that. And they open from the inside, but one of them came like kilter, and then she couldn't get it back. And so she's like, Mom. So I ran down, and I'm like, oh no, I'm not unmuted. Anybody who joins it is gonna hear us, like she's trying to adjust the window.
Oh, no.
Anyway, we got it sorted.
Oh, the adventures.
We do these, Eleanor's seen these, but we do these webinars for our volunteers as well. And they, one of the very first ones we did, like, so my dad is a volunteer in our program and not super tech savvy. One of the first ones we did, like, he of course always logs on like a half an hour early when we're just getting set up. And this is before waiting rooms even existed. This is like several years ago. And like he figured out how to draw on the screen, like on our screen somehow. So he tapped into some unknown features of Zoom.
Keeping you on your toes.
Yep.
That's funny.
Oh, that's funny.
So this isn't showing to Facebook yet. Like, it's just recording on this, and then when you guys are going, you'll hit a button to do Facebook.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And then when we share the recording out, we'll edit out this whole beginning portion of it, so that people aren't, the video's not starting off with like, oh, who's in the waiting room?
The story of my dad.
For the
Yeah,
bathroom,
right.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, one reminder right now is that if anyone wants to see Cheryl's timer, now would be a good time to pin her video, which I'm gonna do so that I can also pay attention to when you guys are wrapping up and all of that, and how much time we have for Q&A. I'm gonna try to move on to the next speaker if we reach that 10-minute mark fairly quickly, but.
All right, so it's 4:56. How about I let folks in, and if you presenters want to like turn your video off now or something like that, just so it's not awkward for the next couple of minutes, you could do that. And then Eleanor, if you want to just like tell folks welcome and that we're gonna start this soon, I'll
Sure.
just start admitting folks as they come in.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, here we go.
Hello to folks who are just joining us. We'll begin in just a few moments. Just so everyone knows that this meeting was started recording as soon as the meeting started so that we didn't forget to hit the record button. So I just want to give a word of warning to those who might not be comfortable with that. You can always watch also on Facebook Live on the Whatcom Watershed Information Network Facebook page, but you won't be able to ask questions. live, and you'll also be able to watch this recording later on that we'll make available through the MRC website and the Whatcom Watershed Information Network website as well. In the meantime, just sit back and relax, and we do ask that you stay on mute and turn off your video just to save bandwidth. Thank you. Okay, it is 5 o'clock. Welcome everyone. I see some names that I recognize as well as some new ones, so that's great to see. My name is Eleanor Hines. I am the Whatcom County Marine Resources Chair, and this is being hosted tonight with the Whatcom Marine Resources Committee as well as the Whatcom Watershed Information Network as part of their speaker series. And we're really excited to host this presentation tonight, and we hope that you guys enjoy it. The Whatcom MRC, along with our partner Resources, has been involved with green crab monitoring for several years now through their North Sound Stewards program. And so we're really excited tonight for an update on some of the history, biology, as well as what's going on with the management plans, as well as how community members can get involved. But first, let's go over some of the virtual etiquette stuff that we now have to go over for every meeting, just to make sure we're all on the same page. This meeting is being recorded, as I mentioned earlier. It is also being live streamed on Facebook Live. It will be made available on the Whatcom MRC website after this. It will also be available through the Whatcom Watershed Information Network as well. So you can share it with all your friends who might have missed it, or you can view it again, because I'm sure it's going to be so awesome. You'll just want to watch it over and over again. Excuse me, microphones and cameras are muted except for the presenters. When the time comes, if during the Q&A sessions, if participants raise their hands and are called on, then we'll be able to allow you to talk. During the question and answer times, which each presenter, we have 5 presenters in an hour, so it's going to go by pretty quickly, and we're going to do our best to stay on track, but we will do our best to allow for question and answer. So there's 2 ways that you can ask questions. You can use the chat function, or you can use the raise hand function. So I urge you to use the chat function, but you're definitely welcome to use the raise hand function. To use the chat function, you hover down at the bottom of your screen, and in the middle of the slide, you can see where it's circled in yellow, there's the chat right there. And then on the right-hand side of your screen typically will appear a chat box. And if you want to make sure that you type it to everyone, that way we can all see it, we will then be able to ask those questions to our presenters. If you type into the chat box and we're not able to get to your question, our presenters can also answer in the chat box back to you, or else it'll also help us go back to those questions at the end if they're not able to get answered otherwise. You may also raise your hand. In order to do that, you'll have to open up the participants box, which you can do by going right next to the chat box. It's just right next to it. Hit participants and you'll similarly get another box that'll have a list of the participants, but down at the bottom, more importantly, there'll be a little blue symbol with a hand for the raise hand function. So click on that and we'll look out to see anyone who raises their hand. If you're joining us by phone, you can raise your hand by hitting the *9 and that will raise your hand and we'll call on you. And if you have any technical questions throughout this, please, you can either add it to the chat box to everyone, or you can chat to myself, or you can direct it to Cheryl Lovato Niles with the Washington State University Extension, and we will do our best to help you. And so let's get on with who's actually talking tonight. So I thought I'd give you guys a little rundown of who our speakers are going to be so you know what to expect and what the flow is going to look like. And I'll give a really short introduction to each of our speakers as we get to them. So to start off, we're going to have Emily Grason, a marine ecologist and crab team program manager for the Washington Sea Grant program. She'll kick us off with a little bit of a more general history of European green crabs, including their biology and why they're such a threat. Next, Chelsey Buffington, the environmental specialist from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Aquatic Invasive Species Unit, will give us a deeper dive into the history of European green crabs, more specifically at Drayton Harbor, along with the collective managements that have formed all throughout our state to better manage these invasive species. After her, we have Simpson, the Ecosystem Project Coordinator with the Northwest Straits Commission, who will talk us through the current collaborative management process for the Drayton Harbor plans, as well as what this means moving forward. Today is one example of how all of these different entities are all collaborating together to make sure that we can better defend Drayton Harbor from these invasive species. Next up, we have Lindsey Parker, a scientific technician with the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. She actually used to help us monitor the site, and she's seen in 2 of these photos on this slide. She'll give us an overview of what work is currently being done and the current status of green crab in Drayton Harbor. And then to close things up, we have April Fleming, who is also a scientific technician with the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, who will speak to who's involved and how community members can support or otherwise become involved in these efforts to manage these invasive species. And so with that, I will stop sharing. If Emily is ready to go, you can start sharing your screen. And I would just remind everyone, feel free to add into the chat box as Emily is talking if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to respond to them in our short time frame. So Emily?
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? And
Yes.
do I have my screens correct?
Hang on. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for the introduction, Eleanor, and thanks so much to the MRC for hosting us for this event. We are a long list of speakers, but we did want to highlight how collaborative this effort is, not just locally, but also statewide. My job as the program manager today for Washington Sea Grant's crab team, which I'll talk briefly about, is to introduce you to the species in question, which is European green crab, of course. So this is the reason we're here today. This crab is frequently listed as one of the world's most damaging invasive species. And the thing I like to point out about it, if you haven't heard me talk about green crab before, is that this species is by no means evil. It is not malevolently taking over our habitats. It's just doing what comes naturally to it. And it happens to be that because humans have moved it around the world, that it's been successful at establishing populations in nearly every temperate marine habitat in the world. And it happens to do so in a way that conflicts with human activities, specifically economic activities, and therefore it's gotten quite a bad rap. Now, of course, when we see a crab like this, and April will be able to tell you a little bit more about how to identify this crab from our native species, it doesn't look that menacing, right? But the thing that we're concerned about isn't so much that one crab, it's when the crabs reach population abundances that translate to impacts on native ecosystems and economies. This crab has a tendency in particular to become extremely abundant in places where it establishes new populations. And just by virtue of trying to make a living, just by virtue of having to find something to eat and find a place to live, the numbers of green crabs can translate to some really broad ecosystem impacts. So first, I want to just provide a few quick notes on what it is about the crab that makes it so successful as an invasive species. One is that it has a pelagic life stage. So when it first hatches out from its egg mass, it has a free swimming stage called a zoea that is really, really tiny. And it floats around on the larvae for 30 to 90 days or so, and then basically gets washed anywhere the currents take it. This makes it very easy for the crab to spread and very difficult for us to prevent it from spreading. In addition, this crab is relatively prolific, and that can contribute to rapid population growth. What you're seeing here is a picture actually Chelsey took of a female with an orange egg mass that she's carrying. You can see it's almost the size of her entire body, same size as her entire body. So there's a lot of eggs there, 500,000 eggs or so per brood. In addition, in this part of the world, green crabs grow larger and faster than any other part of the world, so we have that claim to fame. But what that means is that they reach reproductive maturity earlier, and they have relatively higher fecundity per crab than they do in other parts of the world. So being prolific supports their invasion success. They're also relatively tough. They can withstand really broad environmental conditions. Here I'm showing you temperature and salinity tolerances being broader for green crab than they are for our native Dungeness crab. They're also intertidal shore crabs, so they can withstand more heat and drying out than a lot of crabs that we think of, like Dungeness crabs or rock crabs. These crabs are found higher on the shore. They're very, very tough crabs. And lastly, they're what we call ecological generalists. They aren't picky about what they eat, and they aren't picky about where they live. And that just enables them to basically show up and succeed in a broad range of habitats. It also means that it's more difficult to predict their ecological impacts because they will basically eat anything they can get their claws on. And their broad habitat preferences also make it difficult to predict what's going to happen when they show up. They tend to be found, especially on the West Coast, in relatively, as I said, intertidal, so shallow, marine habitats, particularly estuarine ones like salt marshes, pocket estuaries, and to some extent, we're concerned about eelgrass beds. We don't find a ton in eelgrass beds yet here, but as they become more populous, that could be a concern. On the East Coast, they've been shown to really damage eelgrass beds, which is a very big concern given the ecological importance of eelgrass to salmon, juvenile crabs, orcas, etc. So this is all to say that invasive green crabs, if they become abundant in Drayton Harbor, they threaten the ecological, economic, and cultural resources of our area. And this is just sort of a quick before and after of what are some of the things we could potentially lose if green crabs are able to become abundant. In order to figure out if they're going to become abundant, it helps to think a little bit about how they got here. So I'm going to give you a brief history of the West Coast invasion. They were first detected on the West Coast in 1989, and they were almost certainly moved here by humans as stowaways in seaweed that was used as packing material for either bait or live seafood and dumped out on the beach. But from there, they were able to spread northward using that free-swimming larval stage. And they arrived on the outer coast of Washington and British Columbia by the late 1990s. I'm going to zoom in here to show regional history. Interestingly, they didn't make it into the Salish Sea until at least 2012, so more than a decade later. And we know that was a human-mediated expansion where people brought green crabs in bags of mussels that were used for biotoxin monitoring from an infested bay on Vancouver Island to a place called Souk, BC, where they were really isolated for a number of years, only in this one embayment, most likely. So, that was really overcoming this dispersal barrier, which is the outward flow of water through the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So there's some oceanography involved in the trends of green crab. In addition, we know that strong El Niños and blob events increase the survival of green crabs. So these are pieces of the picture where we're starting to learn what factors could influence green crab success or be working in our favor to help combat green crabs here locally. So I would just want to say that in response to green crabs being a concern here, that one of a number of programs that is going on to do monitoring and help combat the potential for green crab invasion and establishment is Crab Team, which is an early detection monitoring network, mostly monitored by volunteers, that consistently monitors 50 sites around around Washington's Salish Sea for European green crab. So there are people at all of these sites looking every month, April through September, even during COVID, for European green crab. And you'll see that there is a site here in Drayton Harbor, which has been monitored since 2017. In fact, Carrie, the original monitor, one of the original monitors, is on the call today, as well as Eleanor and other folks on the call who are the current crew. So that's excellent. So this is one of a number of programs that is looking for green crabs. You'll hear Chelsey talk about other statewide management efforts. And I just wanted to close by providing a quick snapshot of what the status of where we know green crabs are in the region. The first detection was made by volunteers in 2016 on San Juan Island, and we know of a number of locations where green crabs are found, but their numbers in most of these places are very, very limited to just a few individuals. The larger red circles are some of our hotspots that we are more concerned about, and you can see there's one here in Drayton Harbor. So from the sort of early detection, moving through assessment and management is where we hope to bring you today. And so to do that, I'm gonna pass the microphone over to Chelsey, and there could be a time for a question or two, or we could make a transition quickly.
So we do have about 2 minutes if we want to stay on schedule. So if there are any questions, I invite anyone to type them into the chat box or raise your hand. And if we don't see anything soon, we'll get Chelsey to start pulling up her presentation. I know sometimes it takes folks a moment to think of those questions, but I am not seeing anything. And if you still think of another question through Chelsey's talk, whether it relates to Chelsey's talk or Emily's talk, please feel free to add them into the chat box. So since I'm not seeing anything, Chelsey, please go ahead and get started.
Yeah, is the correct presentation showing?
It is.
Okay. All right, so hi everyone. I guess we'll just get started. I'm going to give a brief rundown of the history of the green crab invasion in Drayton Harbor, like Emily said. I'm going to really focus on the Drayton Harbor area and not go too deep into the management of other regions. But first, so Drayton Harbor, as many of you might know, has had a battle with water quality over the years. In 1988, a major portion of the harbor, about 500 acres, was downgraded due to pollution from livestock and failing septic systems, and again in 1995. In 1999, the harbor closed its shellfish harvesting, and organizations such as the Drayton Harbor Oyster Company dissolved and moved on to other things. Luckily, in 2001, the Puget Sound Restoration Fund which was created by Betsy Peabody, launched the Drayton Harbor Community Oyster Farm to restore shellfish farming and build support for projects to recover water quality. And then in 2015, Drayton Harbor Oyster Company came back and started to do their operations within the harbor in a section that was where they were allowed to go to. And by 2016, they were able to provide local shellfish to the community once again. Drayton Harbor is a great location for growing and harvesting shellfish, and the local community has been working extremely hard for over 20 years to improve its water quality. So then I'm gonna dive into 2017. So Washington Sea Grant's crab team site is set up at the mouth of California Creek to monitor for green crab to further protect the harbor from detrimental impacts. Until recently, in 2019, there had been no evidence of green crab. The first smolt was discovered on August 17th by a crab team member who was conducting a survey with a different citizen science organization called COAST, or Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey Team. The second molt was discovered shortly after by another crab team volunteer. I think it might have been the same person, while they were walking near their on the beach near their residence. And then a third molt was discovered during routine monthly monitoring efforts at the crab team site. These discoveries prompted some rapid response efforts within Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife with the aid of Sea Grant staff and their science expertise. And we got ready for some intense trapping assessments, and we planned those to be completed in 2019 before the end of the trapping season. So I'm going to talk about those responses a little bit here. The first response was in late September and consisted of trapping sites that were easily accessible due to land access permissions. We had 5 sites consisted of California Creek, No Name Creek, Dakota Creek, the Marina Boat Launch, and Cane Creek, which is on the outside of the harbor. During that effort, we set a total of 178 traps, and we found 17 green crab, all of which were young of the year, and they're pretty dispersed throughout, but as you can see in that image there in the south east corner, if you will. We captured 8 males and 9 females, so pretty 50-50. And I won't go too deep into the catch rate, but we caught about, if you were to set out 100 traps, you'd catch nearly 10 per 100 traps. The second response effort was in October, which is typically towards the end of the trapping season due to changing tides and cold weather. In this effort, we wanted to get more information on the range the green crab might have held in the harbor, as well as the extent upstream of the 2 creeks. We set traps throughout 6 different regions, consisting of 23 microsites that had a minimum of 2 or 4 traps each. At some of the sites, we could only fit 2 traps due to the habitat and the permission that we had in the area. We had a total of 267 traps and captured 21 more green crab, which were still mostly young of the year. I believe there was a couple caught at the mouth on the outside of the bridge area that were a little bit larger. During that trapping effort, our catch rate was about 7.8 crabs per 100 traps. So in total for 2019, we set 445 traps and captured 38 green crab and had an accumulative catch rate of about 8.5 crabs per 100 traps. We also had 2 additional reports from local residents with confirmed green crab sightings. One which was in Birch Bay, where a seagull was spotted predating on a green crab, and I believe it had it in the air and dropped it on the ground or something like that, but someone found it and they walked up to it and identified it correctly. The other site was in Blaine at the fishing pier. A local was crabbing with a recreational ring pot and pulled up a green crab in his ring pot. These assessments and other captures led to discussions of future management, and initial meeting amongst stakeholders was set in February of 2020, so pre-COVID time. So I'm just gonna say, like, why do you think we would need a collaborative management in Drayton Harbor, and why is it so different from areas where past incursions have occurred? For starters, green crab know no boundaries, and they have been found across several continents. The past incursions in Washington state have occurred in locations with singular jurisdictions such as Macaw or Dungeness Spit, and it has been a little bit easier to work with a single jurisdiction to get management plans set up and going out there. In late 2019, the Salish Transboundary Action Plan was finalized because we knew that we weren't always going to be that lucky. This document was created to establish and implement a coordinated and collaborative response to green crab in shared waters between Washington and Canada, and it's been used as a guide while drafting a management plan for Drayton Harbor, which is various landowners within the harbor and up the two creek systems. During our first stakeholder meeting in Drayton Harbor, we had roughly 30 participants from more than 20 various organizations from the local community, including private landowners, tribal members, local, state, and federal organizations. So this just goes to show the necessity for coordinated and collaborative management. And luckily, we have a great community that is helping to provide energy, enthusiasm to this project, and it's been great to work with all of these people. And that's all I have. Try to make that short and sweet for you guys.
I'm really impressed at how quickly you and Emily have gotten through this, because I know both of you can talk for hours about green crabs, so well done. Do we have any questions? I'm looking for any hands raised or any questions in the chat box. If I don't see anything, next up we have Simpson with the Northwest Straits Commission. If you want to start getting your presentation up, I know so far we know there's green crab and they can spread pretty quickly. And so how are we going to manage them? So if you want to start your presentation.
All right, am I sharing the right screen?
Yes, you're great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eleanor. And yeah, I will be talking today about the management of this project and how we really decided to approach the problem that Emily and Chelsey have just laid out for us really well. So like Chelsey sort of alluded to, we really had to meet the obvious need for a rapid and intensive action in Drayton Harbor to prevent green crabs from becoming established in this area. And we really had to come down and think about what it was the scope of this kind of management would actually look like. And we wanted to answer the question how we decided to actually meet that need. So the first thing we did was we realized that this is a really big project and we needed to be really dedicated to it for the management of green crabs to be a success. We were able to secure funding through June of 2021, so next year, and we are continuing to look for funding to keep the project going well beyond that. It's incredibly important to continue the management and removal of green crabs as long as possible to ensure that they aren't becoming established, especially in a place like Drayton Harbor. So with our current funding, we are actually able to support 3 people working on projects in Drayton Harbor. And that includes me as the local coordinator and our 2 WDFW technicians, April and Lindsey, who you'll hear from in just a little bit. So with April and Lindsey working solely in this area, that means 40% of the WDFW green crab technicians in the state are focused only on removing green crabs in Drayton Harbor. And, you know, at least to me, that really signifies how dedicated we are to this project. And because this is such a big project, we wanted to make sure we thought about the best way to not only remove all the green crabs we could, but also learn as much as we could about them. And to do this, we really needed to have a thoughtful approach to our project. So in kind of boring terms, that means creating things like a management plan and a protocols document and other things like that. But really what it boils down to is we wanted to make sure our trapping strategies and management plans were adaptive. meaning we needed to approach this project with as much flexibility as possible, especially since green crabs, they don't really like to stay in one place. And so we needed to make sure we addressed that as well. So we did this by having systematic and opportunistic trapping. So I'm probably sure you're thinking, well, what does that really mean? Well, for systematic trapping, we set up specific sites with specific locations that we wanted to trap on a regular schedule. So you can see the picture on the left. We marked this trap location with a PVC pipe, so we knew exactly where to set this trap every single time. It's the same as how scientists like to repeat experiments over and over and over again, and that's really what we're trying to do here. We want to know what types of critters we're catching in these areas, if there's any changes over time or space, and generally just get some really solid ecological data, all while trying to catch as many green crabs as possible. I mean, we're already out there, so we might as well try to collect as much data as we can. Opportunistic trapping is really what it sounds like. We're taking any and every opportunity to set out as many traps as we can in as many areas as we can cover. And this really gives us the opportunity to find green crabs hiding in other areas that we just weren't trapping to begin with. And based on what we find with opportunistic trapping, this also gives us information on if we should actually be setting way more traps in that area and on a more regular basis. You can see in the picture on the right, we don't have any markers of any kind showing us where to set traps. We just set traps where we thought it might make sense and are basically just trying to see what we might find. And Chelsey kind of alluded to this, but beyond trying to be thoughtful in our trapping strategies, we're also trying to be really inclusive and collaborative, which is a huge part of our management effort. There's so much interest and energy in trying to protect Drayton Harbor that we wanted to make sure whichever groups wanted to be involved are involved. And while WDFW is the lead agency on this project, our three organizations, DFW, Washington Sea Grant, and the Northwest Straits Commission, are working closely together to create our trapping strategies, make management plans, and basically everything else involved behind the scenes with this project, which you can obviously see right now with all of us participating in this webinar, instead of just one of us from one organization giving the presentation. But we're obviously also working with a larger collective, collaborative team to draw on as many resources as possible and in the field cover as much ground as possible. Having the Whatcom MRC host this webinar is just one example of how we are trying to be really collaborative with other groups. And really the last way we're managing this effort is simply by just working really hard. So in spite of COVID, where we have to wear masks and maintain a 6-foot distance while we're slogging in the mud flats, carrying traps and just lugging around buckets of bait, we've been able to cover a really good amount of ground. And like I mentioned before, we have 3 dedicated staff for this project, but it's really just April and Lindsey doing the majority of the trapping by themselves while I get to sit at home behind the computer. But since this project is inclusive and we want to be as collaborative as possible with some of our partners, we have been training and partnering with staff from other agencies like the Washington Conservation Corps, so we can have even more help to do more trapping across Drayton Harbor. Ideally, we'd like to trap every nook and cranny we can get to. And our goal is that in the future, that we will be able to use the community's energy and interest in protecting Drayton Harbor to bring on volunteers into the trapping effort. We really wanted to do that this year, but unfortunately that just wasn't possible right now due to COVID restrictions. And that just really showcases why it's so important to work collaboratively with other agencies right now. April and Lindsey are actually going to provide more details on how our trapping effort has gone so far this year, and let you know how you can help in the age of COVID, as there are other ways to help besides volunteering. And so with that, I will pass the baton on to Lindsey. Thank you.
We do have a few moments for questions if we have any questions. I know I have a quick one. Is that photo of the pillars that you had up there what you guys refer to as the pillars?
It is, yes. I could.
Nice. And I also wanted to
show another
point.
one of that. Yeah.
What?
I will also show a picture of the pillars just so that people have a better understanding as well.
Great. Yeah. So you can see how hard these ladies work out in the field. I know a number of folks in this meeting have themselves participated slogging through the mucky mud, carrying traps out to their sites. And I can only imagine what it's like carrying way more than 6 traps out to the site. So we are really appreciative that they're here, because I know that they've been working really hard this summer. And the reason why we picked tonight was because it's not during a low tide. So thank you for being here. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box or any hands raised. So go ahead, Lindsey.
Okay, give me just a second. Oops. Okay. Why? Does anybody have any tips? Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so like Eleanor said, my name is Lindsey, and today I'm going to be giving an update on the data so far this season. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on the type of traps that we're using when we go out into the harbor. On the right-hand side is our larger traps. Those are called Fukui traps. And they have larger openings and larger mesh sizes, so they're really geared at some of our larger crabs. As you can see in that trap, we have 4 of our larger European green crabs in that example. And then on the left-hand side, we have our smaller traps. Those are metal minnow traps. They have a smaller mesh size. They have about a 1-inch opening of the funnel that they actually use to get into that trap. So those are the 2 main types of traps that we're using when we're out in Drayton Harbor. While it is possible for recreational crabbers to see a European green crab, it's probably not very likely. It'd probably be more likely when you're walking around on the shore, since they are more of an intertidal species. And April will talk a little bit more about what to do if you find one. As Ali mentioned, we have sites that we're trapping really systematically. And so this is a map of those sites that we repeatedly trap on a regular basis. In red, we have 4 sites that we trap twice per month. And so those are spots that in 2019's assessment, we caught multiple European green crab. And so we're really trying to extensively trap there and make sure we're covering our basis and seeing how many crab are there. In addition to that, we have 3 sites up each of our 2 creeks. So 3 that go up Dakota Creek and 3 that go up California Creek. And these are really helping us see the salinity gradient of the creeks and how that's being used by crabs and how that might even change seasonally. So both of these are ones that we're trapping on a regular basis. And in addition to that, we're trapping opportunistically as much as time and tides will allow. So this is a map of the trapping effort so far. We've done 11 weeks of trapping so far this season, and we've set almost 1,900 traps. So in yellow are all of the traps that we've set in this 2020 season. Out of those traps, we've caught 99 European green crab in Drayton Harbor. Those are the orange dots that you see on this map. Another way to look at this is actually a heat map. And so there's 3 sites that we've found European green crab. And the main one is the Pillars, which is up the northern end of Drayton Harbor. 86 out of our 99 green crabs have been caught at the Pillars. We've also caught 2 at Dakota Creek and 11 at California Creek. But those are the 3 sites that we have found European green crab. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about the Pillars. It's actually the remnants of the Cherry Street Pier that used to be off of Cherry Street there. So it's right now, we call it the Pillars because of all the pilings and the big, large concrete pieces that are there. But between the woody debris of the pilings and all of it's actually a lot of brick out there, which seems to have the perfect little hidey holes. It seems like it's a really good habitat for European green crab there. And that's why they've taken hold there, and we're finding so many there. So this is a look at our catch rate. You can think of our catch rate as crabs per 100 traps. Overall, our catch rate is about 5.14, so just over 5 crabs per 100 trap for Drayton Harbor as a whole over these last 11 weeks. The catch rate might be influenced by seasonality, and we're kind of learning more about this as we're trapping green crabs here in Washington. But if you think back to that heat map, so many of our green crabs have been caught at the Pillars. So I wanted to kind of separate that out here in this graph. The blue line is the exact same Drayton Harbor total catch rate that was in the last slide. But in orange, I separated out the Pillars versus gray along the bottom at a much lower rate of our other sites. So our catch rate at the Pillars is really changing how our catch rate looks overall. And then out of the green crabs that we have caught so far, they have ranged from 38 to 87 millimeters, which is roughly 1.5 inches to 3.5 inches. And so most of our crabs have been from the 2019 year class. We do have about a handful that we believe are from the 2018 year class. And luckily so far, we have not caught any that are young of the year, so the new 2020 year class. Does anyone have any questions?
So you can use the chat box or raise your hand. You know, that was a really nice summary of what's going on up there, because it's really interesting to know. And poor crab in the photo that only has one claw.
That means something's getting them, so I like it.
Are there any questions? Otherwise, we will move on to April, and maybe at the end after everyone, there'll be more questions. So April is going to talk a little bit more about how you folks can get involved.
All right. Make sure that everybody's seeing the PowerPoint here.
Yes, you're great.
Great. So yeah, I'm April, and I'm going to talk a bit about the community partners that we've had out in the field with us and how everybody else can help. So like Ali was describing, this is a really collaborative project. We've been really blessed to be able to have the Washington Conservation Corps people come out from the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association, the Department of Natural Resources, the Northwest Straits Commission with Ali coming out, Washington Sea Grant with Emily and her whole team. We were able to go out with Drayton Harbor Oyster Company and actually trap at their farm. The Port of Bellingham has been supportive and has given us a lot of storage area at the Blaine boat launch. The city of Blaine has given us access to the Tideland property that they own out in Drayton Harbor. Then of course, individual landowners that own land along the shoreline and along the creeks, and they let us come trap out there. So here's some pictures of us out in the field. The top left-hand corner is me and the biologist Kat from the Drayton Harbor Oyster Company. We went out and set 80 traps out on their farm. Below that is Melise from the Washington State Conservation Corps from the Department of Natural Resources, going through a minnow trap at California Creek. Allie there in the middle, looking at a European green crab, and then Simone from the Washington Conservation Corps team with Nooksack Salmon Enhancement out at No Name Creek. So as you saw from the maps, we still have quite a bit of ground to cover of Drayton Harbor. So if you happen to own any land or know anybody that owns shoreline access to Drayton Harbor along any of the creeks, please contact Allie. We would love to be able to come out and trap. We'd love to be able to get around the whole harbor and trap everywhere we can to get an idea of the extent of what's out there, suitable habitat and whatnot. So you can contact Allie at simpson@northweststraits.org. And like Allie said, right now we can't take volunteers due to COVID restrictions, but hopefully in the future, once those restrictions are lifted, we'll be able to get people out in the mud with us. So make sure to contact Allie if that's something you're interested in. Having people out trapping with us really helps us get as much accomplished as possible. We would not have been able to get almost 1,900 traps set if it wasn't for the Washington Conservation Corps people and Allie and Emily coming out and helping us. So once those COVID restrictions are lifted, it'd be awesome to have extra help. So really what's important is for everybody to know how to identify European green crab. It's not likely that you will find them in recreational crab pots. One was found off the Blaine Pier in a ring pot, but in your typical Dungeness recreational crab pot, you're probably not going to find one. You'll most likely find them while walking along the beach. And the key identifying factor for European green crab are their 5 marginal teeth. There's no native crab species in the Puget Sound that have 5 marginal teeth. Those are those sharp little things here, these teeth that go all the way up to the eyes, and it's on both sides. And they also have 3 rostral bumps between their eyes. They're about 4 inches in width when they're full grown. They've got flattened legs in the back that help them swim. They can be really fast when they're in the water. And they've got a bit of a pentagonal shape. So if you happen to find one of these out on a beach walk or while you're crabbing, or you've happened upon a crab that you think could be a European green crab, we ask that you take a picture, record your location, and then leave it there. And this picture here on the right, in the right-hand side, is a purple shore crab, and on the left-hand side is a European green crab. They're both kind of green. The purple shore crab is obviously not purple here, and that helps you see why color isn't a key identifying characteristic of crab species, particularly our shore crab. They're similar in size. When I picked up the trap with that native crab in it, at first I thought it could have been a European green crab. So in order to prevent unneeded death of our native species, we ask people to leave them and just take a picture and send it in. You can call us at that phone number. There, you can report them online at invasivespecies.wa.gov. You can email crabteam@uw.edu. And there's also an app that you can find in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store called Washington Invasives. And you can go ahead and report any invasive species you find there. So again, take a picture, record your location, and we ask that you leave it where it is. Any questions?
Yes, there actually are a few questions. So I would start with Catherine actually asked, what are some of the identifying characteristics right as you transition to the slide with all the identification stuff on it. So Catherine, if you feel like that wasn't adequately answered, please let us know. But looping back, Lucas asked, because we're not catching young of the year, do we hypothesize the catch rate will be lower next year? And this can be any of the panelists if anyone else wants to jump in too.
Probably not me.
I'm happy to take a stab at that if that's all right. So one of the interesting things is that so young of the year are very, very tricky to spot, and right now it's likely that based on observations and information from elsewhere, that young of the year would be 20 millimeters or smaller. So they're incredibly small, and they're too small to come to traps. So we usually don't see them just make a decision to enter traps until they're in the higher 20 millimeter, low 30 millimeter size range. So we may see, we will know in the next couple of months whether there is a young of the year cohort that has sort of any presence at our trapping sites. That said, it's possible to find green crabs that small. Mostly if you're walking around looking, you can sometimes see them skittering, and particularly in very shallow, very, very muddy protected habitats as their favorite spots. But what I guess, we hope we don't see many or any young of the year, but we try not to get our hopes up too much. But what that would mean is that it bodes well for management overall, that the green crabs that first got to Drayton Harbor that green crabs aren't arriving maybe every single year, and that some of those favorable oceanographic conditions permitted them to get there initially, but they sort of get picked off both through trapping and native predators in a way that makes the population less likely to sort of explode, which is what we're ultimately trying to avoid.
Thank you. Chris, kind of along similar lines, asked what defines young of the year, and is the Fukui trap the primary one that catches European green crab, or do we also get them in the minnow traps too?
I actually have, so I think Emily answered the defining the young of the year side, but I do actually share my screen. I've got some trap type data. You guys can see that?
Yes.
Great. So our catch rate right now is actually pretty similar between the Fukui and the minnow trap. You can see in our table there, I've also included shrimp traps. We tried those a couple of times off the pier and haven't had success with them yet. But one of the reasons why I included this image is because at this point, our larger crabs this isn't a green crab, but our larger green crabs that we've been catching are getting to the point where they'll no longer fit into the minnow traps. So as this season progresses, I could hypothesize that we're going to see higher and higher rates in our Fukuis. But then again, if we do see young of the year, the mesh size is much smaller in the minnow traps, and a lot of times the smaller crabs, when there's larger crabs in there, aren't going to go to the Fukui traps. And so I could kind of see the rates really change depending on how the season progresses and if we start seeing those young of the year.
Thank you. The next question, I don't know that we really had the answer for, but I kind of wonder this myself. Cameron asks, what's with Blaine, Asian giant hornets and European green crabs? It seems like kind of a hot spot for a lot of different stuff right now, but it seems like, I don't know if any of you want to comment on that.
I feel like I should toss this to Chelsey, who has a better statewide view on aquatic invasive species, at least. But I will say that, there are other places in Washington state that we're particularly concerned about green crab. That Blaine isn't uniquely in a bad situation with respect to green crab. You heard Chelsey mention a couple of other management sites. Green crabs were first discovered in Dungeness Bay in 2017. And that's actually a really cool story because that's part of a national wildlife refuge, so it's been trapped really aggressively by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service since 2017. And this is the first year of the 4 years of trapping that they've been doing to remove green crab, where their numbers have substantially dropped. So they're doing something like 3,000 to 4,000 trap sets a year, each year since 2017. This year they've set, as of like last week, it was a total of something like 1,600 trap sets, and they had caught 3 individual European green crabs. And this is at this time last year they would have had 50. So this is that's a really cool story. We hope, we're fingers crossed, that holds up, that they actually have been quite effective. And then there are a couple of other management, locations as well. In particular, Macaw Bay has been an area where the Macaw tribe has been actively working to control green crabs. And there's some other concern in other coastal locations as well, where green crab, as I mentioned in the beginning, they've been detected there for 30 years, but there's a number of factors probably that have changed in terms of oceanography that mean they're becoming more abundant on the coast than they have been over that period, which has caused increased concern, particularly with respect to shellfish resources. I noticed somebody asked about effect of green crab on native species. And one of the biggest concerns for impacts may be whether or not they can impact shellfish resources, particularly those that aren't protected or grown in active culture, like off-bottom culture or bags or netting. Those, so recreational harvest and tribal harvest are often dependent on wild harvest, and those resources may be more at risk of European green crab predation than some of the cultured resources.
I'm just going to add to that too, because Cheryl had asked how we can control them and if it's with continued trapping. And I just wanted to say yes. At the moment, our biggest tool we have is to do continued trapping efforts such as Dungeness, Spit, and Macaw. And so we're hoping to get that effort continued in Drayton Harbor and other places. So that's why we have been working so hard with the collaborative management.
Great. Catherine had a follow-up question to her earlier question on identification. Can European green crab properly be identified by their larval stages or only as juveniles/adults?
It is possible for folks who have a fair amount of experience looking at larval crabs to be able to tell that first life stage apart from native crab larvae. However, I will say that it's not easy, and I'm fairly sure that I cannot do it. And this is after like trying to learn. So there is a program statewide that conducts light trapping to keep an eye on juvenile Dungeness crab populations. So they're attracting crab larvae to a light source and then sampling the populations. And they've also gotten quite good at identifying other species. So they're on the lookout for green crab larvae in light traps and other plankton tows they conduct. I think it was last year, maybe the year before, we spent, I think, a good 20 hours trying to identify if one specimen we found was a green crab based on like a spine at the base of the third like dactyl ischium, like just words about appendages of trying to tell it apart from native species. And we ultimately decided it was not a European green crab, but so with a fair amount of training, more certainly than I've had, it is certainly possible to tell them visually apart. It does take, good microscopes and a good, number of images and search image. The other possibility is for detection, actually, is a project that a couple of people are working on, including myself and my colleague Sean McDonald at UW, looking for environmental DNA in the water samples that can be collected. And even if we don't have a crab or a larvae in the water, the DNA that they might shed could theoretically be tested for in the water. So there's assay development that has to go into that, but that's another possible detection tool that hopefully will come down the pike at some point.
Great. I think we already answered this question, but just making sure there wasn't anything else to add to it. What effects do these green crab have on native species? I know you talked a little bit about shellfish. Is there anything else anyone wants to add?
Yeah, I'll add that they do tear up eelgrass. I think someone had mentioned it earlier. I think it was Emily, that on the East Coast they see restored eelgrass beds just torn up by green crabs, and they can also compete with juvenile Dungeness crabs. They're the same size, and they can kind of fight each other for some habitat. And they obviously fight for habitat with our other native shore crabs. So those are just kind of some of the effects that they have on our native species. And just, they obviously also take a lot of other resources like foods and other habitat areas. So they can obviously be really detrimental.
Great. And the last question we have in here, so if folks still have other questions lingering, now is the time to enter them into the chat box or raise your hand. Chris asked, what are you doing with the caught European green crabs in Drayton?
Yeah, I can kind of answer that. I've got one here. So Lindsey and I process them out in the field. We take a lot of measurements. Then we determine if they're young of the year by size ranges given to us by Emily. And if they're of that size range, we keep them alive by placing paper towel in here. They can live for a really long time, which is really interesting, just in a plastic bag with a paper towel, wet paper towel. But the ones that don't meet that size requirement go in my freezer. This one's been frozen. And then we take them down to Emily, and she does genetic testing. And I don't know if she wants to talk about that.
Sure. Yes, the green crabs go through many stops. There's like a caravan of green crabs. They go, through several people's home freezers. We have, including my own. And so ultimately what we do with specimens is we are, of course, every green crab we find gets pulled out of Drayton Harbor at the moment. And so we're not putting anything back except for the native species. But then with the green crabs we collect, we're trying to learn as much as possible from every single specimen, which means that each crab that comes in, because these are some of the very first invaders or potential invaders, they're really valuable scientifically. We can learn a lot about how an invasion happens or how this one is happening by collecting as much data as we can from them. So there's a number of collaborations to do that. So I'm an ecologist. I'm not super well trained in genetics. So we collaborate with some really smart geneticists. Our lead collaborator is Carolyn Teepolt, who's over at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and probably has the biggest data set on West Coast green crab population genetics. She's helping us answer questions about how populations of green crab are moving around in our region over time. And she's also starting to try to answer the question of how temperature might affect the success of the early stages of invasion. So we've seen some oceanographic patterns with temperature and numbers. Can we see a genetic signature of those patterns as well? We're doing other research with the specimens that come in, like, for instance, we've been working with a parasite biologist, Chelsey Wood, and a student of hers, Daisy Newman, to look for metazoan parasites in green crabs. One of the things about invasions is that invasive species tend to leave their parasites at home, and they don't necessarily have new parasites when they get to a new part of the world. And so that can be one factor that helps them succeed as an invasive species. And then we have our, we're data hoarders, as a colleague of mine said. So we're trying to do things like we will take the stomachs of the green crab and hopefully develop a technique, which doesn't exist yet, to use DNA, use genetic evidence to see what the green crabs are eating, because it's very hard to actually dissect apart a green crab's stomach and tell what's left in there. So things like that. We're trying to collect as much information and learn about everything we can think of.
Wonderful. We got a thank you and wonderful presentation. It is just past 6 o'clock. So I guess I have one last question that I want to ask you while you're here. What is the plan for continued trapping? Maybe you already said this, but are you trapping for the entirety of the rest of the year? Are you taking the winter off because maybe the crabs are going to be harder to catch in the winter? Or what is the plan, and when would you start back up if you did take a break?
So I'll take a stab at this. Currently, we are working with Northwest Straits Commission to potentially have some funding for someone to be on during the winter to do some experimental trapping, because we want to know if in the winter green crab are going utilizing different parts of the harbor or different subtidal zones. So that is something that we really want to start trapping and understanding more. And we want to do that at not just at Drayton Harbor, but other places where green crab have been found or that are in higher densities, such as out in the outer coast at Willow Pond, Grays Harbor. With that, I am still a full-time permanent staff. And so if I want to go out and trap in the winter, utilizing Drayton Harbor Oyster Company, because they've been so great with us coming out and maybe trying some stuff, I might try to do that myself. We would like to try to find some more funding to extend our team that we currently have. That would be the most beneficial goal that we have. But we do have funding where we will start back up. I believe it's in April for the next season. For the biennium funding that we have, will go from April to June 30th. And hopefully we'll find more funding in the future to continue as well.
Great, thank you. I also, to wrap things up before I forget, there is an evaluation for this that Cheryl will post in the link if she hasn't already. Also, Emily posted something in the link or in the chat box with a link too for a great resource if folks want to check that out. I wanted to highlight that as well. Cheryl has now posted the link to the form so we can get feedback from everyone on how helpful this was. Should we do another event like this again? Maybe I'm assuming we probably will do more green crab centered events in the future. But thank you everyone so much for being here, and I echo the comments in the chat box that say fantastic presentation. It's so wonderful to have bright, brilliant woman working in science and working on this issue. So thank you everyone so much, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks.
Thank you to everyone. I hope we missed the chance to meet in real life, but hopefully one day we'll be able to get to put faces to all these names.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.